Hello, Jenks here again, the developer evangelist from Xero. In my last video, I showed you how to get started with the demo application that I made for the .NET SDK. In this video, I'll show you how to add an invoice controller so you can sync invoice to Xero. First, I'd like to show you how an invoice can be created in Xero. This is Xero interface. If I go to Business and Invoices, I'll be able to click a new invoice button to create a new invoice. From here, user can type in the contact that this invoice goes to, specify date, due date, and create a line item here. You can put in description manually, but I'll use the linked item from my inventory. Immediately, the unit price is pulled out, the relevant account that I have coded is pulled out, and also the tax rate. The amount is also populated on that line. So with everything calculated, I can approve this invoice, and this will go into Xero. Going back to invoices, I'll be able to see the last item that I have created. The developer do this. Let's go back to our Bible, documentation side, accounting API, and accounting API sets. We can see a method called invoices. It allows users to retrieve sales invoices and purchase bills or create them. So let's go to post. Post allows us to create or modify. All I need is just type, which determines whether this is invoice or a bill, contact object, and also line items. I need at least one line item to be able to send an invoice. It has description, quantity, unit amount, and account code. Back to Visual Studio Code and see how we can realize this with our .NET SDK. Let's take a look at the contact controller. You can see there's a few methods defined here. One gives you all of the contacts and return the view. There's a create method that gives you just a view, and a post method to create it. For the invoice feature, we're basically trying to create the same. So why don't we copy this controller, name it to invoice sync controller, and copy this name because we will need it later. I'll have to change the class name of the invoice to invoice sync controller and change the name for the dependency injection. I'll try to make this get method work first and comment out the rest of the create methods. We'll deal with them later. I'll change the name here in the comment to invoice sync before I forget. Now the logic related to token refresh and instantiating of accounting API does not change, but we do need to use a different method to get stuff from Xero. So instead of get contacts, we'll need to use get invoices. IntelliGence have smartly told me that there is a method for it. So get invoices async. We'll use this method. Of course, it will not return a normal contact object. It will return an invoices object. So I'll need to rename it. Look at this method closely. You'll see that there's a place for you to put in a where clause. Where clause act like filters in Xero API. You can get exactly what you want here by putting a filter in. Let's take a look at the documentation. So let's go to the filter part, and you can see that it's we can filter by the top level elements of an API response or object, and we can. Here's an example for the date. We want to get the date for the last 7 days. And it has to be in this format exactly. So we need to find a way to pass our local date time object into this date time object or this string exactly. Let's go back. I'll declare a new variable called invoice filter. Let's make that equal to nothing for now. And here I will create another variable called 7 days ago. So here we'll hold our actual datetime object. So datetime.now, and we'll need to add a few days to it. If we add -7 days, so this datetime object will be 7 days ago. We need to make sure that it's exactly like this format. And fortunately, there's a method called toString. So if we put toString at the end of the datetime object, we'll be able to convert it to this format exactly. So we use the long format for year. That's for Ys, and month, and day. So that should give us this exactly. And there is a prefix to it. Let's go back to the spec and check. So prefix will be all the way up to here, and we'll concatenate it with 7 days ago and close it off with a bracket. So this will give us exactly the filter Xero API needs. That is the where clause. Let me put the full format here so I don't forget. So now we have created our filter, we'll need to apply it. If you take a closer look, you'll see it's expecting some optional parameters. The first one is about if modified since. We'll make that now because we're not using that. And the second one is actually where the filter should be. So we've put it in. This will make sure that it returns the invoices object. And let's name that to invoices. And the response should give me a list of invoice objects. So underscore invoices, and we'll pass back this invoices object back to the view if there's a view. But we don't have a view here. So let's copy this contact info view. It's basically the same thing with different names and different variables being called in a Razor template. So let's not worry about create for now. Let's go to index. So in the index we can change the title. Xero invoices in the last 7 days. I need to change a few things here. We still have a name that is to address. We'll have a few other things. So putting invoice number as the first one to the contact, the date we raised the invoice, the due date, and the total of the invoice. Let's name it total due, and a space in due date. Here we go. So we're going to repeat it in this invoices object, and each invoice in the list is the invoice object, and invoice has the parameters we want. The first one we want is invoice number. Let's go back to the doc and check if it is indeed that. In the SDK, go to OAuth2, model, and invoice one. You'll be able to find the parameters defined here. You'll know exactly what the name is. So invoice number is invoice with capital I and N. We need to find the to. So to is interesting. To is actually a contact object wrapped in an invoice object. So I know contact has name, capital N, but I'll need to check whether the contact object is starting with a smaller c. So let me go back. So here we go. It's a contact type and a variable called contact. So let's change this to capital C. And the next one is the date and due date and total. Invoice date is a datetime object. That's a problem. We need to convert this to a string. Let me try to find that date. It should be a date. Oh, here it is. Yep, datetime object, and the name is date. So let's use toString, and we will display it in the Australian way. So the long date tells us which day it is. date, the long month, and long year. This will give us the date in the Australian format.
We'll do the same to the due
We'll
date.
copy this for the due date, which is the same. Let's confirm. Yes, due date is also a datetime object. We'll need to get the total of the invoice, which I know from memory is the top level element. Looking at the model, we can see the subtotal, total tax, and the invoice total including tax. That's the one we want. So let's shove that in, and we need to make sure user has a convenient home button to go back to the home view, and this should give us the right view. If I build this should work. Let me press F5. In a minute, it should build the project and load up the interface for me. Okay, here we go. I haven't created a button for get invoices yet, but let's trigger it manually. So it should be invoice sync. It's trying to think, maybe refreshing the token, and I can see the list of invoices that I have raised. There's a bunch of test ones that I've created. So let's go back to home. Now we can rest this for now. So the get method is now working. Let's create the create method. So going back to the invoice sync controller, let's unlock this. It's probably a good time for me to fix that missing button in the view. So get this one. Replace it with get invoices. Invoice sync with create method. So this should display a view for me to put in the invoice information. So those informations are the like the to person, the date, due date, etc. Let me go back. This should return a create view, which is a view that I've included here. Now it used to have a simple form to collect contact information, but we're going to change this to a create invoice method. So create invoice, Xero invoice. This has a few groups here. So let's separate this. We will need this, but we'll need a few of this. Instead of contact name, we would like to have the send invoice to contact name field, and we will tell people to enter a contact name, and instead of email address, we would like to have a line description. Okay, now it's a finished view, so it should display all of the things. I've skipped through the part that I was just boringly typing all this out, but this should make a beautiful form for us to create an invoice, and that's got everything we need. So we just need to remember the variable names over here and put them in the controller so we can receive this. So we're going to unlock this part. So post context create now is the invoice sync, and this is saying that grab the name and email address, but email address is no more. We'll have to grab it from here. So we'll make sure the line description is there. Name is still there. Line description is not there. We'll create another string. Grab another string. That is line quantity. So line quantity is string. Grab another string that is line unit amount, and another string that is line account code. Now notice that everything is in string. We'll have to convert them into different types for creating that model. So we used to create that list of contacts and put it into the create contact async. We won't need to do that anymore. So let's get rid of that. We'll need to create the objects related to the invoice. Now let's call that object called invoices. Let's pass it in here. and we'll pass the pass user to invoice sync controller and the index of it, so people can see the last invoice that they have created. The invoices hasn't been instantiated. Let's do it here. Invoices equals to, let's just make it equals to a new invoices object, just the empty one. Now what's in the invoices? Invoices actually has a list of invoice objects. If I go to definition, this will actually jump right into the package that I'm using, which is the SDK itself, and went into the where this model is defined. This is invoices object, and it just contains a list of invoice. There's nothing else. So I will have to make this objects, this list equals to a list of invoice. Let me go back. So I'll need to make sure that invoices dot this invoices list equals to a invoice list. So how about if I create a invoice list variable, and I'll name it invoice list, and I'll make this equal to a list of invoice. So list with the type of invoice, and that's an empty one for now. And that list of invoice will need to contain an invoice. So if I create an invoice object, actually I'll add this in first. Add, and I'll need an invoice object. So let me create an invoice object equals to new invoice, and in here I have opportunity to initialize this object with a few parameters, and I'll see what IntelliJ suggests me. The first thing I'll need to have, that I must have, is the type according to the documentation. So I have to have type contact line item again, so I'll type in type. So I want a type equals to something. Now type equals to, so I wonder if I can just use the invoice type as a string over here. So account receivable, so we're trying to create an invoice. So act rec. Now immediately it complains about it. So let me take a look. So cannot convert string to type of type enum. So it looks like this is the type that it has to have. So let me go to the invoice object and take a look there first. So invoice object type enum. So type enum actually has a few options. IntelliJ should be able to give me if I just instantiate a type here. So let me go here and go invoice. So here we go, type enum and dot account receivable. So this will set the type to account receivable, which will create an invoice. I'll need a contact, which should be a contact object. So let me go back. Contact, yes, it has to be a contact object. So I'll create a contact, but this is not defined yet. Let me define it here. New contact, and we'll leave it blank for now. We'll populate it later. Actually, I can just put it in there. The only required item is just the name, and we're going to make it equal to the name input over here. And sorry, that's the contact name. Actually, to be able to differentiate these two variables, I will use a different method to initiate it. So contact dot name equals to name, so that will avoid that conflict. So in the invoice, we'll have to continue. After contact, we'll need to have that line item. The date first. Date equals to, and we'll just use the system date. This date in the SDK is a date time, so we can just use date time now, because whenever we raise one, we want to set a time to now. And the due date, we want to make it so let's say if the terms of trade is 30 days, then we'll need to use today. Actually, I should change this to today. Only the date is required, not the time. And I'll add days, add 30 days in this. Line amount type is another one. Actually, I don't need this. I'll need it, but I need to at least have a line items object, and that line item object line item object is a list of lines, line item. So I'll need to make sure that the lines are defined. So let's assume that lines is a list of line, and I'll create that line object, lines object, and that equals to new a list of line item, and so it's a list. I'll need to have at least one line object in there, and that means I'll have to create a line object here. So line equals to new line item, and in this line item I can initiate a few things such as description equals to we'll make that description the same as line description here. Here we go. We'll need the quantity, and that equals to the line quantity that user entered. We'll need the unit amount. We'll make that equal to the string here, and we'll need the line. We'll need the account code. Account code has to equal to the line account code here. Great. Now this should all work. What is this complaining? Convert to float. Here we go. Now these are actually float. So we'll need to find a way to these are supposed to be float. So these are float objects, quantity and unit amount. We need to convert the string to float, and we can use a method called float parse, and we'll pass this string into a float. Here we go. So that should take care of it. Go away. Nice. Very good. And I have a misspelling mistake here. This is the beauty of object-oriented programming. It tells you everything that is wrong on the first go. Invoice list, add invoice, and this is the new invoice that I have created. What is this complaining about? Let's see. It does not exist in the current context. It seems I have used a comma instead of semicolon. So now everything looks alright, except for this one. So this should pass the invoices back in here, and it's in the wrong type. Let's deal with that. So this is actually expecting a contact, and that is wrong because we're trying to use a create invoice function, and we'll need to create more than one, so create invoices. And what is this expecting? Invoices object. Okay, great. This should actually create the invoice for us. Now we're ready to a test drive, final test drive. On get, if we visit invoice sync with create method, we'll be able to see the view for creating the invoice. That is the create form that I have created. It should once I hit submit, it should create the invoice, communicate to Xero API, instantiate all of the objects, grab all of the input that the user have submitted, and create that invoice in Xero for me. And it should redirect user back to the invoice sync index. Now I'll need to add some user-friendly interface in the home controller to make sure that the user can get there. So going back to the home controller and the index, I'll need to create a couple of methods. Here we go. We'll do the invoice sync, and we'll direct people to index, and we call that get invoices. And in the second one, we're also going to invoice sync, but opening up the create action. This should display the view and also allow people to submit it. So create a Xero invoice. Okay, just an invoice should do. All right, now let's build it. Now it has built it, and it should open up interface for me to test right now. So let's get invoices again. So that's correct. And if we go to a create invoice, it's loaded up the form successfully. So let's do a test. So we'll raise another contact. It's Jenks Guo. By the way, this will create a new contact in Xero for you. Line description is meat burger. Quantity 1 is enough. And to test the float, let's make it a float 2325, $10.25, and account code 200 is the most common one for sales. Submit. Finger crossed, it has created one. So the Jenks Guo is the last one. Entered 1128. That's converted beautifully. Going back to Xero, if I refresh this page, I should be able to see the invoice raised. Here we go. To the end to the video, I hope this gave you some idea on how to use our .NET SDK so you can build your application that integrates to Xero. In the future, I hope to show more SDK features to you. Bye for now.